welcome back to my channel. Today it is a beautiful spring day outside. The flowers are blooming, the leaves are starting to come out, and the birds are singing. It's so beautiful out right now. I can't wait to plant some flowers and do a little bit of gardening. I thought I would bring all of those spring vibes into today's video. But before we get too far into the video, this video is sponsored by Book of the Month. For those of you that don't know what Book of the Month is, it is a super popular and fast-growing book service for readers. Their main mission is to promote new and emerging authors, as well as help readers to discover new books and authors that they'll love. One of my favorite things about Book of the Month is how diverse that their selection is. They have a bunch of different genres of books as well as authors and titles. I am always so impressed by the books that they choose. The way that they choose their titles is their team goes through hundreds of book selections each month and gives readers their choice from a curated selection of new and early release titles. This allows you to spend more time reading and less time researching. Book of the Month is also completely risk-free, so if there aren't any titles that you're interested in, you can skip any month, anytime, and you will not be charged. Plus, they have the best prices for new release hardcover fiction books. You can get your first book for only $9.99 using the code GETFUN. One of the selections I am particularly excited for is Kalyn. This is a fantasy retelling of a vilified queen from Hindu mythology. This is an intricate tale of motherhood, fate, courage, sacrifice, and the nuances of female power. It kind of reminds me of Circe, a retelling of ancient Greek mythology, but instead using Hindu mythology. It just sounds super interesting. I love mythology retellings, so very excited to pick this one up. Again, if you're interested in picking up this title or any of the others, I will leave a link to their website down below, and you can use the code GETFUN to get your first book for only $9.99. Thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. Let's get into my spring recommendations. Okay, so I have a total of 15 books here. Yes, 15 spring books. It was really difficult for me to narrow it down to just 10. So I decided, you know what, I'm not gonna hold it back. I'm just gonna go for 15. Honestly, I could have found probably over 20 books to recommend for springtime. I really wanted to have a diverse set of books, but also books that are just the epitome of spring. A lot of these books are very cottagecore as well, so if you're into that type of aesthetic like I am, I do have a lot of books that have that cottagecore type of vibe. So I have some middle grade, some fantasy, some graphic novels, manga, and of course classics, because classics are my favorite to read this time of year. Honestly, I could have had an entire video of just spring classics that I love, but I decided to bring you everything in this video. There's just so many amazing books that have the spring vibes in them. We're gonna start with the goddess of spring herself, the person that I am inspired by with my outfit today, and that is Persephone. There are tons of Persephone retellings. I personally haven't read very many of them, so I didn't include any of those on this list, although I feel like those would be perfect books to add to your reading list for spring. But I thought the best place to start would be with the source itself, which is the Greek mythology of Hades and Persephone. What really got me into Greek mythology to start with was Stephen Fry's book Mythos. And the reason that I did this is because I knew that Stephen Fry was funny, and oh my goodness, he is. I also love how he condenses a lot of the stories to make sense, and he connects them in such amazing ways in this. So this, of course, includes the story of Hades and Persephone alongside a bunch of other stories. But if you're just looking for their story, this has an amazing encyclopedia in the back where you can find all the gods and goddesses and the section that they're in, and you can flip directly to that section. But I do just highly recommend reading this. This is, in my opinion, the best place to start if you like Greek mythology or if you're curious about it but you don't know a lot about it. This is amazing. And Stephen Fry's writing in this is hilarious. He really does bring new life to these stories, and he just makes it so easy to understand and consumable. So I just highly recommend this. And of course, Persephone, the goddess of spring, is in it. Let's go into middle grade books next. I actually have quite a few middle grades, and I think it's because spring feels very lighthearted and full of new beginnings and life, and there's something about middle grade books that just go along with that really well. I also think there's a lot of amazing middle grade classics as well, so a lot of these are classics. The first middle grade I have is Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. This is one of those books that I read when I was young, like middle grade aged, and then also reread within the past few years and absolutely loved it. If you read this as a kid and liked it, I feel like as an adult you'll love it. I got a whole new appreciation for the themes that were talked about in this book, and the movie as well as the book are perfect for spring. It's about Winnie Foster, who discovers a magical spring that is on her family's property, and this spring makes those who drink it immortal. Winnie meets the Tuck family, who have drank from this spring and of course are immortal because of it. They start to tell her about their experiences and watching life go by while being immortal, and so she has to decide whether she wants to make this decision as well. I feel like there's a lot of deep topics and thoughts that can come from this book, even though it is like a tiny little bitty middle grade book. It just packs a punch, and I highly recommend reading it as an adult. It's so good. The next one I have is of course The Secret Garden. I feel like this is probably the most obvious springtime classic book. Let me tell you, this book is amazing. It was one of my favorite books from last year. I do want to warn you though that the first few chapters of this are kind of difficult to read. This was written a very long time ago, and the main character is really not a good person in the beginning of this book, so there are a lot of things that are said and implied that are definitely offensive to a modern day eye, but after you get past the first few chapters of this book, it is amazing. This is all about childhood trauma and the implications from that trauma and finding healing through nature as well as people that love you. It is so beautifully told, and I loved the relationships in it. I love seeing the transformation of so many of the characters in this. Also set in such an atmospheric, beautiful setting with a garden and an old house. It's just beautiful. And they recently made a Secret Garden movie, like a modern day version, and I can't even tell you, thinking about it right now makes me emotional because the movie was just absolutely stunning, and it's definitely going to be a movie that I watch this year again because it was just like one of my favorite movies of last year. It has so many amazing conversations and lessons and things that you can learn as an adult, as a child, any age. I feel like you can get a lot out of this. Okay, the next one I couldn't decide on whether it was more spring or summer, so I decided to put it here with spring because I think that the feelings that this one gives are much more reflective of spring, like new beginnings and life and happiness and sunshininess. And so that book is, of course, The Complete Tales of Winnie the Pooh. I will never stop talking about this book until everyone reads it because it is by far one of my favorite books of all time. I don't know if you guys have books like this, but there are certain books, and Harry Potter is one of those for me as well, that are just like on a different tier. Like they just can't even be reached. And this is one of them for me. I absolutely love this book with my entire soul. I know a lot of people will ask, and this is the Barnes & Noble edition. I don't know if they still make it, but it is gorgeous. And it's a bind up of both of the Winnie the Pooh books. This is probably the most wholesome, feel-good book that you could ever find in your entire life. And the quotes that come out of this are just bangers. The stories are so simple and sweet, but it really does heal that inner child. It's such a beautiful book. Another book that I get emotional even just thinking about because I love it so much. When I was thinking of modern fantasy books that gave me the type of feelings that spring gives me, this is the middle grade that I came up with, The Girl Who Drank the Moon. This is one of my favorite middle grade books of all time, and it definitely is up there with all of my favorite middle grade classics as well. This is about a witch who lives in a cottage in the woods, and every single year in the village outside of the forest, they leave a baby as an offering to this witch. And it's really funny because they think that the witch is bad and that they need to like leave this as an offering, but the witch sees these babies and thinks that these people are just leaving them as orphans in the woods. So it's a really interesting concept. But one year she accidentally feeds one of the babies moonlight instead of starlight, and this fills the child, which she names Luna, with extraordinary magic. And I love the relationship between the witch and Luna, and seeing how hard it is to make decisions as a parent. I think this really shows that conversation in it, which I really liked. I think there's also just a lot of other messages that go along with my personal beliefs and just are so impactful to me personally, but I think to a lot of others as well. There's a reason that so many people love this book. The last middle grade book I have is Howl's Moving Castle. This to me is almost in between a middle grade and a young adult. I feel like the writing in this is a little more complex than most middle grade books. If you love Studio Ghibli movies, you have to read this. It is exactly like the movies. As far as the feeling that you get from this, it's the same that you get from the movies, and I absolutely loved this book so much. I think what this book really is about is love. It's the kind of love that it doesn't matter what the person looks like or who they appear to be on the outside. It's falling in love with the person that they really are. And that's what I loved about this book. But it's also extremely magical and whimsical. It's one of those books that you just feel really good reading. I have a feeling people will ask about this copy as well. And this is from the Folio Society. It also has beautiful illustrations that are colored on the inside. And it's just a beautiful edition of this book. Let's move on to the adult and the young adult fantasy books that I have. This, in my opinion, is the perfect witch cottagecore book. I really enjoy Naomi Novik's writing. I think that she has the perfect fairy tale type of writing. When you read this book, it feels like you're reading a classic fairy tale, but it doesn't feel old or stuffy. It feels original and fun and new. This is actually inspired by Beauty and the Beast. This is about Agnieszka. I hope I'm saying her name right. And she lives in a quiet village that is right next to the corrupted woods. Inside of these woods, there are monsters that when these monsters attack humans, they then turn into monsters as well. In order to stop this from happening, the people of the village have relied on the wizard that lives in the tower that they call the dragon. Every 10 years, he demands that one young woman from the village must come and be his assistant. The magical forest in this was by far my favorite enchanted forest book that I've read. I loved the way that it was portrayed as being creepy but also beautiful at the same time. It's also a standalone book, which I think is really nice to have once in a while. Okay, these next two feature fae, and when I think of spring, I think of fae big time. I didn't want to include A Court of Thorns and Roses just because that is like the fae book, so if you haven't read that, you absolutely should. The first one especially is very springtime, but I wanted to choose some other options if you've already read that particular book. And the first one is These Hollow Vows. This is definitely inspired by that first book, in my opinion. I read these really close to each other and I saw such a parallel between the two. If you're a big fan of A Court of Thorns and Roses, I think you'll really like this as well. This is about our main character named Bree, and she hates fae. This hatred is only amplified when her sister is taken by a sadistic king to one of the fae courts. In order to get her sister back, she decides that she is going to pretend to be the fiancé of Prince Ronan. Because she is unwilling to let her heart get in the way, she finds some help from a band of fae misfits, one of them being the mysterious leader Finn, who is a little more of a darker character in this. I'm sure you can already see the parallels between A Court of Thorns and Roses, but I think this is only going to be a duology, so I'm very excited to see how it continues. And again, fae and spring just go together like peanut butter and jelly. I feel like this list wouldn't be complete without The Cruel Prince. I think the entire series feels semi-spring, but especially this first book. The setting of Elfham is just so beautiful with flowers and trees. It just is the perfect spring setting. What stands out to me about this book above any other fae book is that this has evil fae in it. The fae in this are not good, and I personally love that traditional view of fae, when the fae are these beautiful creatures that live for hundreds of years, but really they're evil. I love the contrast between the beauty and them being really horrible on the inside. I just love it. And this has that to a T. It's personally the only book that I have found where it has that type of fae in it. I'm sure there's others out there, but man, did Holly Black do it right in this. It's amazing. The next two are adult classics, and again, this is something that I could have found so many more books in, but I chose my two favorites. So let's start with the obvious, which is Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. This is the illustrated edition, and it also has some really cool interactive inserts in it as well, letters, and just, oh, I am so excited to read this. Pride and Prejudice, in my opinion, is the romance book. You just can't beat Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet. Amazing characters, amazing interactions. Like, if you haven't read this book, you really should. It's worth all of the love that it gets. Not only does it have amazing characters and romance and all of that, but I think the way that Jane Austen writes about the social expectations that are put on women in this time are just, it's so amazing. And of course, seeing the meaning of love between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth, I think is the best part of this. To set aside their own pride and prejudices in order to really find love with each other, and it's just beautiful. Such a beautiful book. Okay, the next one is Little Women. Little Women is one of those books I think that is best read either in winter or in spring. This is one of those books that will make you laugh and cry, and you just grow so connected to the characters in here, especially the sibling dynamic. I personally have one sister, and I can see both of us in the relationships in this book. I personally relate most to Meg and Beth, and my sister is way more of an Amy, and I think both of us have different qualities of Jo, but I love seeing those relationships and seeing how realistic that the sisters are. It's just such a good relational book. I am so glad that Little Women is getting way more love and attention than it has in the past. I know when I was younger, I was not interested in reading this book, but I am so glad that I picked it up as an adult. It has such a big impact on my daily thoughts about my relationships with everyone in my life, and I adore this book. Okay, so the last category I have is my manga and graphic novels. Let's start with the manga series, which I think is the perfect fit for spring, and it is A Silent Voice. This is another book that has some really, really hard-hitting messages in it. I will say it is difficult to read at some points, but I think the best books are those that are hard to read sometimes. This is about Shoya and Shoko and their relationship from when they were kids to adults. It starts off with them in elementary school, and Shoya is bullying Shoko, who is deaf. It then shows how these actions have impacted them as teenagers and young adults. The perspectives in this series are honestly some of my favorite I've ever read, because you really get to see both sides of the story. Seeing how Shoya, being the bully, has been impacted, I think is something you don't see in a lot of books. You get to see how Shoya is struggling with regret and feeling like a horrible person who can never make up for the bad deeds that he did. Then you also get to see how Shoko reacts to Shoya and how she's just such an amazing character. Her forgiveness and her character is so strong and beautiful and beautifully written. This is only a 7-book series, so it's really easy to get through, and by far my favorite manga to ever have been written. Next up is Pailu of the Woods. This is a beautiful graphic novel, and it has some beautiful forest and like floral imagery. It's just a gorgeously illustrated book. This is about Willow, who has recently had her mother pass away. Dealing with this grief and her emotions, she runs into the forest. There she meets Pailu. Pailu is a lost tree spirit who is trying to find her way back home. Through their journey, Willow has to confront all of these pent-up emotions that she's been feeling, and this starts to put both of the girls in danger. This is such a magical story about life and loss and friendship, and just a really cute little story to read for spring. Next up, this would not be complete without the Tea Dragon Society. This is another book that I've talked about a million times, but I will continue to talk about because it is so cute. The story in this is very simple and sweet, and that's why I love it so much. This is such a wholesome story about a girl named Greta. She goes into the tea dragon shop, and there she discovers the dying art of tea dragon caretaking. She also makes new friends with the shopkeepers, as well as the shy ward named Minuet, who is this cute little pink-haired character. And it's just so sweet and wholesome. I love it so much. Okay, and last but not least is actually my most recent read, and it is The Sprite and the Gardener. I have never seen a more springy book in my entire life. There's not any that compare to this when it comes to springtime. But this is about a little ambitious, kind-hearted sprite named Wisteria, and she unearths a long-forgotten magic of helping plants grow. With this talent, she shows her other sprite friends, and they all help a human with her garden. It's such a gentle, simple story. And I also love how beautiful that the images are in this as well. So the perfect spring book. All right, well, those were all of my spring recommendations for you guys. Let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were. And also if you found any books to pick up during this spring, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and supporting me. I love you so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.